Ambassador Riva Lang stood at the center of the vast council chamber, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes scanning the sea of alien faces before her. The species gathered in this room, some ancient and powerful, others barely emerging from their own darkness, were all there for one reason: to ensure the future of the galaxy was shaped without Earth's influence. At least, that's what they thought. Across the table, the council representative, a Thelrexian with its silvery, translucent skin and elongated limbs, flashed a toothy grin. The gesture was a calculated move, a sign of confidence, but Lang saw it for what it was: arrogance. It was their way of signaling that they had already decided Earth's fate. "You must understand, Ambassador Lang." The Thelrexian's voice was smooth, almost soothing. "The Armistice, as we outlined, is not just an agreement between Earth and the Council. It is a galactic peace initiative, a blueprint for ensuring the stability of all worlds. The reparations we're asking for are minor compared to what was lost during the war." Lang's eyes narrowed. Lost. That was one way to describe the Thelrexian Empire's retreat after the humans pushed them back from the edge of the galaxy. But that wasn't what had truly been lost. It was their pride. They were hoping to take advantage of Earth's reluctance to escalate the war further, to humiliate humanity into submission. And in their arrogance, they thought they could hide the truth. "Reparations, you say?" Lang's voice cut through the calm. "What you call reparations are, in fact, a calculated attempt to strip my people of their ability to defend themselves. You've proposed military disarmament for Earth, while your own fleets grow ever stronger. And while you claim these terms are minor, they will ensure we are bound and shackled for generations." The room fell silent. The council members, from the insectoid Vivrak to the telepathic Virl, exchanged uneasy glances. Lang's words had struck deeper than anyone had anticipated. The Thelrexian leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "Ambassador Lang, the terms are fair. This is the only way forward. You must understand the necessity of peace." Lang's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Peace? No. What you're offering is not peace. It's a prison built with chains of paper and lies. Earth does not need your peace, and we do not need your shackles." With a deliberate motion, she reached into her jacket and slid a small black card across the table. The room grew colder as Lang's calm voice filled the chamber. "We will not sign this." She stood up, turning to leave. As her footsteps echoed in the silence, she knew one thing for certain: the galaxy had just made its first mistake. The heavy doors of the council chamber slid shut behind Ambassador Riva Lang with a finality that reverberated through the entire structure. The hum of alien voices, once a dissonant chorus of anticipation and manipulation, fell into an uneasy quiet. Lang didn't look back. She was already thinking ahead, every step calculated, every detail already forming in her mind. The moment she stepped onto the transport platform, her face remained the picture of composure, though inside, her pulse quickened. She had anticipated this moment, but the weight of it still settled on her shoulders. The Terran delegation had just walked away from the table, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to underestimate humanity. As the sleek transport zipped away from the council headquarters, Lang's communicator beeped. She activated it, her expression hardening as the voice of President Nathan Carver crackled through. "Riva." Carver's voice was stern, clipped. "The public broadcast is ready. Are you sure about this?" Lang's eyes flicked to the darkened space outside, stars twinkling coldly in the distance. She knew what Carver was asking. The decision to release the full contents of the peace agreement, along with an exposé of the Council's true intentions, wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a declaration of war. But Earth's response could no longer be anything but defiant. "Send it," she said, her tone unwavering. "They'll know everything." Back on Earth, the world held its breath. Media channels were flooded with the broadcast, each one rebroadcasting the message across every communication network, from the thriving metropolises of Earth's core to the dusty outposts on Mars. And in every home, office, and public square, the people of Earth saw the same thing. The truth. The hidden clauses, the forced disarmament, the economic sanctions that had been disguised as peace incentives. It was all there. The entire galaxy now knew how the Council had hoped to cripple Earth's power, to suffocate their military capability, and force them into subservience. They were ready to strangle Earth's future, all for the sake of galactic peace. The final statement was clear. Lang's calm, unflinching voice echoed across the screens. Humanity will not be bound by the cowardice of those who watched us burn. The gates to Sol will close, and we will remain unbroken. Across the galaxy, the response was immediate. The Council scrambled to contain the damage. Delegates from dozens of species, some nervous, some furious, began demanding explanations, their once gilded view of the peace process shattered. But no matter what they said, no matter what their propaganda machines spun, one thing was undeniable. The Terrans had just pulled away from the table, and they had done so with a force that would be felt for generations. But for the first time in ages, the Terrans were no longer the underdogs. They had made their choice. They were done negotiating. The galaxy, once brimming with hope for lasting peace, was now on edge. The Terrans, once thought of as no more than a small, fiery human species, had made their move, and the consequences were beginning to ripple outward, felt in every corner of known space. The Council had underestimated them. Now, humanity's influence spread like a growing shadow across the galaxy. At first, the effects of Earth's sudden withdrawal were subtle. The Phyrexian-controlled sectors remained silent, their fleets keeping to their borders. The Vridori alliance, caught between the Council's bureaucratic promises and the undeniable ferocity of the Terrans, began to reconsider their alliances. The neutral systems, once prosperous trade hubs, noticed the first signs of disruption. Trade routes that had always been predictable now had unexpected delays, and transport convoys vanished without a trace. At first, it was chalked up to normal space piracy. But as the days stretched on, the pattern became undeniable. A quiet, methodical elimination was taking place. Even the pirates themselves, once known for their bold raids and unpredictable tactics, began to fear. Fleet commanders who ignored the whispers of an unknown enemy were found dead in their ships, their vessels gutted from the inside, no trace of the attackers left. But there was always one thing that was left behind, an unmistakable calling card. A small emblem burned into the hulls of ships, a silver phoenix rising from the ashes. The news spread like wildfire. The Terrans, they were back. And they were no longer the desperate survivors of the Phyrexian War. They had become something else entirely. The old stories of Terran ingenuity and will were no longer just stories. They were terrifying truths. Humanity had not just survived the war. They had been planning for the day when the galaxy would turn its back on them. In council chambers, the mood shifted. Where once there was mockery and laughter, now there was concern and hushed murmurs. The member species who had once relished the idea of forcing Earth to its knees were now questioning whether that goal was ever truly achievable. The threat the Terrans posed had always been lurking in the background, but now it was coming into full view, and no one knew how to stop it. The first true test came when an entire fleet, one of the largest in the galaxy, a multi-species armada dispatched by the Council, disappeared in the Helios Rift. No distress signal, no debris, just an eerie, suffocating silence. Then came the encrypted message. It was short, and it was meant to send a single, undeniable truth to the Council. This is your warning. Stay out of the way. It was signed, simply, Humanity. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, but in the weeks following the disappearance of the Council's fleet, the galaxy couldn't ignore it anymore. Earth was no longer a quiet, isolated world. Earth was mobilizing. The news came in fragmented bursts, a report from the outskirts of the solar system detailing strange, seemingly abandoned stations coming online once more. An encrypted transmission from Mars claiming a new fleet had emerged from the shadows of the planet's moons. But the most chilling reports came from those closest to humanity. Terran ships, sleek and unmarked, were seen skirting the fringes of Council space, disappearing from radar before emerging once again at key strategic locations. Council intelligence had been tracking Earth's movements since Lang's speech, trying to make sense of it. It became clear, far too late, that humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. The warships now emerging from Earth's solar system were unlike anything the Council had ever encountered. Sleek and deadly, the ships combined advanced AI systems with human ingenuity. They were not the traditional military vessels of the galaxy. These ships were something else entirely. And they were massive. Each one was a hybrid marvel, combining the best of human engineering with adaptable alien technologies scavenged from the war. The ships were fast, their outer hulls resembling the sleek, deadly contours of predatory fish, designed to slice through space with deadly precision. They glided through space with eerie silence, as though the very stars themselves feared them. The most terrifying part, however, was the technology that powered them. While the rest of the galaxy focused on large-scale fleet tactics, humanity had developed something far more devastating. Kinetic disruptors, weapons designed to disable entire fleets without firing a single shot. The disruptors released devastating shockwaves that interfered with the very fabric of space itself, scrambling enemy systems and leaving ships vulnerable to annihilation. Entire fleets, once thought invincible, were rendered powerless in moments. President Nathan Carver addressed the people of Earth via a broadcast to the galaxy. To the Council, we say this: we are not afraid. We do not seek your peace, nor your approval. We seek only the right to live free without your chains. As the broadcast ended, the galaxy went silent. Every communication network, every piece of technology, paused in anticipation. The first true test of humanity's new power came with the quiet destruction of Cardum Drift, a bustling trade hub on the edge of Council space. It was a strategically vital location, where dozens of species traded resources and goods. The drift was a symbol of the Council's control, a nexus of economic and political power. And now it was about to become a message. It began without warning. The usual traffic of cargo ships, patrolling fleets, and merchant convoys continued as normal until the lights went out. For the next several hours, there was no communication, no response from the drift's central command. Routine cargo deliveries were delayed, then completely cut off. The Council had yet to realize what was happening. They hadn't even begun to suspect that a massive fleet was moving into position, cloaked by sophisticated Terran technology that made it nearly invisible to the most advanced sensors. When the attack finally came, it was swift and brutal. At precisely 300 Galactic Standard Time, the lights above the drift's command station flickered once, and then went dark. Then the first of the Terran warships emerged from the void, emerging from stealth with terrifying precision. The ship's hull was sleek and black, a ghost in the void, its weapons glowing with malevolent intent. It was the Vigilance Ascending, the flagship of Admiral Cale Ivers. The Vigilance Ascending unleashed its first wave of kinetic disruptors, silently knocking out the drift's primary power grid. Without a single shot fired, the once vibrant trade hub descended into chaos as vital systems collapsed. The trade lanes, once alive with bustling activity, went silent. Then came the second wave, the Terran Marines. In moments, a team of elite soldiers deployed from the warship, their forms barely visible against the backdrop of the drifting station. They moved like ghosts, swift, efficient, and merciless. They hacked into the drift systems, taking control of critical infrastructure, broadcasting a message to the Council that would soon send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. This is your warning. The message began. The Terrans do not fall quietly into your schemes. We are the masters of our fate, and no one will silence us. The camera feed cut to the sight of captured Council officials, bound and kneeling before the Marines, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. One of the Marines, his face hard but calm, stepped forward, raising a single finger to his lips before turning back to the screen. "Remember Cardun," the Marine said, his voice cold, "and know that we're just getting started." The transmission cut off, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. The first message from Earth was not one of diplomacy. It wasn't a plea for peace. It was a declaration of dominance, a message that resonated with every species in the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a fragile species to be pitied. They were a force to be reckoned with, and their reach was only beginning to extend. The events of Cardun Drift sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Council, once a unified body of dozens of species, now found itself fractured, torn apart by internal dissent. The Terran strike had done more than cripple a vital trade hub. It had shattered the illusion of peace and forced the galaxy to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Terrans were no longer the underdog. They were an emerging superpower. The first signs of disintegration came from within the Council itself. Delegates from the Vridori Alliance, once a staunch supporter of the peace talks, began to distance themselves. The Vuvarak, a calculating species known for their quiet machinations, began to withdraw from their long-standing agreements with the Council. The fear that had once been a whisper was now a roar. The Terrans, it seemed, had found a way to level the playing field. On Vridori Prime, Council meetings grew tense. The representative from the Vridori, a tall, thin creature named Tuvik, stood before the gathering, his 6 eyes narrowing with suspicion. "If the Terrans can do this to Cardun," he said, his voice grave, "what's to stop them from targeting every one of our colonies?" The room went silent. The weight of the question hung in the air. Tuvik's words were a mirror of what many were now thinking. The Thilrexian delegation, once the most powerful voice in the Council, was noticeably absent. Their fleet had been crippled in the attack, and their response had been more about salvaging face than issuing threats. The Terrans had not only bested them militarily, they had exposed the weakness of the entire Council's structure. In the Council chamber, a rare debate erupted among the remaining species. The virile, telepathic, and long accustomed to manipulating emotions whispered among themselves, sensing the shift in the air. The younger, more progressive factions of the Council began to quietly consider the idea of negotiation with Earth, something that had once been seen as heresy. But not all voices in the Council were swayed. A coalition of hardliners, led by the Thilrexians and the fearsome Krijan, a warlike species that had once dominated the galaxy, began pushing for an immediate retaliatory strike against Earth. Their rhetoric was fire and fury, promising to scorch the Terrans into submission. But their calls for war were met with fewer and fewer supporters. The most surprising shift came from the neutral systems, the lesser-known species who had long stood outside the Council's influence. They were watching the rise of the Terrans with a mix of fear and awe. The reports from the fringes of Council space painted a picture of Terran-backed rebellions gaining ground, pushing for independence from the stifling bureaucracy of the Council. The message was clear. The galaxy was changing. In the weeks that followed the destruction of Cardun Drift, the galaxy's balance of power shifted even further. As the Council fractured and its internal debates raged, Earth, in its quiet corner of space, continued to consolidate its newfound strength. The Terran fleet, now a cohesive force of hundreds of warships, cruised just beyond the edges of Council space, a reminder that Earth's influence was expanding faster than anyone had anticipated. From their moon-based command centers and hidden colonies on Mars, Terran leaders made their next move, forming alliances with those who had long been oppressed by the Council. The smaller independent systems, once forced into servitude by the Council's bureaucracy, saw the Terrans not as an enemy, but as a beacon of freedom. Secretly, they began to align themselves with Earth, offering resources, military support, and intelligence in exchange for protection. On the fringes of Council space, the first stirrings of rebellion began to show. The Icarus Coalition, a group of former Council allies, had already begun to launch guerrilla strikes against council patrols. While their actions were initially dismissed as acts of desperation, their successes began to grow bolder. Terran-trained mercenaries, often former soldiers or defectors from other systems, helped organize and direct these operations. What started as small, isolated insurgencies quickly turned into coordinated campaigns, coordinated in part by a shadow network of Terran intelligence operatives. This network, known only to Earth's highest authorities as Project Phoenix, had been in motion for decades. It had been established long before the war with the Phyrexians had even begun. And now, with the galaxy in turmoil, it was coming to fruition. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Nathan Carver made his first public address in weeks. Broadcast across every known network, his message was simple, yet filled with an underlying promise of what was to come. The time of silence is over. Carver's voice rang out across the galaxy. We will no longer be pawns in a game played by the powerful. No longer will we be dictated to by those who see only their own interests. Humanity stands free, and we stand with those who wish to see this galaxy united in the spirit of liberty. The words sent ripples throughout council space. The neutral factions, long hesitant to make a stand, now found themselves questioning their place within the council. Could they continue to live under a regime that had proven so easily corruptible? Could they support a body that had allowed the destruction of Cardam Drift to go unpunished? Even as Earth's diplomatic message spread, a more terrifying one was brewing. Reports of new weapons testing on the fringes of the solar system. Doomsday devices capable of decimating entire planets leaked to the public. Whether the tests were real or a mere show of power, no one knew for certain. But the implication was clear. Humanity was ready to fight, and they were ready to win. The Council was on the brink of collapse. But Earth was poised to rise. The tide had turned, and the galaxy was left scrambling to determine which side of history it would fall on. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of an irreversible shift. The once unshakable Council, now fractured and vulnerable, stood at a crossroads. Earth's unrelenting rise, powered by military might, strategic alliances, and a vision of freedom, had brought the universe to the brink of open conflict. But the Terrans were not driven by vengeance. They were driven by something far more dangerous: the desire to shape their own destiny. On the eve of the Council's emergency summit, the stakes had never been higher. Delegates from the surviving Council races assembled in the newly constructed chambers on Vridori Prime, their faces taut with fear and uncertainty. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional murmur of those too nervous to keep their composure. This time, the Phyrexians, the Krezon, and the Vril had gathered together, but no one dared to speak. At the head of the table stood Phyrexian Representative Zurok, his elongated limbs quivering with restrained rage. His voice, a low growl, broke the silence. "We've underestimated them," Zurok said, his words heavy with regret. "The Terrans have torn apart our defenses, shattered our fleets. They don't just want peace, they want dominance. And they'll take it, one system at a time." Across the table, the Wyvrock delegation, who had once been the most vocal proponents of peace, exchanged uneasy glances. Their leader, Orcs, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "If we act rashly now, we will lose everything. The Terrans are not just fighting for territory. They are fighting for something far greater: the freedom to choose their own path, and the right to stand as equals among the stars. If we continue to oppose them, we will only drive them further into the arms of rebellion." The room grew tense, the weight of Warwick's words sinking in. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong simply dictated terms. Humanity had risen, and now it was offering something new, a challenge to the very system that had oppressed the lesser species for centuries. In that moment, a transmission from Earth arrived, disrupting the Council's deliberations. It was short, a simple message from President Carver himself. "The time for diplomacy has passed. You've had your chance. The galaxy is about to see what it looks like when humanity stands unshackled. This is not a war you can win. We'll fight until every star in the galaxy knows our name." The message sent chills down the spines of those gathered. The tone was clear. There would be no more negotiation, no more peace talks, only an unyielding, unstoppable push forward.